What if the greatest warning about modern money wasn't written by an economist, but by a medieval Islamic scholar nearly 1,000 years ago? What if inflation, debt addiction, speculative bubbles, and the quiet erosion of trust in money were all predicted long before central banks, fiat currency, or digital finance ever existed? We are taught to believe that the problems of money are technical interest rates too high, regulations too weak, systems too complex. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if the real collapse of money is not economic but ethical? Tonight's story begins with a question that feels dangerously uncomfortable. Can a society survive when money stops serving morality and morality starts serving money? To find the answer, we go back nearly a millennium to a man who never saw a stock market, never touched paper money as we know it, yet understood the soul of money better than most modern institutions. His name was Abu Hamid Al-Ghazali, and his warnings sound disturbingly familiar. Welcome to its financial history too. To answer that, we have to travel back to the 11th century, to a man who never saw paper money as we know it, never studied markets or interest rates, yet understood the inner logic of money with terrifying clarity. His name was Abu Hamid Al-Ghazali, and what he warned about then looks eerily like the world we live in today. Al-Ghazali lived during the Islamic Golden Age, a time of expanding trade, flourishing cities, and intellectual confidence. Markets stretched from Spain to Central Asia. Gold dinars and silver dirhams circulated across continents. Wealth moved faster than ever before. On the surface, it looked like an era of stability and prosperity. But Al-Ghazali was deeply uneasy. As a theologian, philosopher, and jurist, he believed that civilizations do not collapse suddenly. They decay slowly, first losing their moral balance, then their social cohesion, and only finally their political strength. And in his view, money was the most dangerous test of a civilization's character. Instead of asking how much money people had, Al-Ghazali asked a far more unsettling question. What role does money play in human life? He began with the origins of money itself. Human beings, he explained, originally relied on barter, but barter was inefficient and unjust. You might have wheat and need shoes, while the shoemaker needed meat instead. Exchange became impossible without coincidence. Money emerged as a solution, not as wealth, but as a neutral intermediary, a measuring tool, a facilitator of fairness. Gold and silver were chosen, he argued, not because they were valuable in themselves, but because they were stable, divisible, and widely accepted. Their purpose was not to be desired, but to help people obtain what they actually needed. Money was never meant to be an end. It was meant to be invisible in its perfection. Al-Ghazali compared money to a mirror. Its purpose is to reflect value, not to become the object of desire itself. The moment people begin to chase the mirror instead of what it reflects, confusion begins. And confusion, when normalized, becomes corruption. This is where his prediction starts to take shape. As societies grew wealthier and markets expanded, Al-Ghazali noticed a subtle but fatal shift. Money stopped being a servant and began to act like a master. People no longer used money to meet needs. They used needs as excuses to accumulate money. Wealth was no longer a tool for living. Living became a tool for wealth. When this happens, he warned, money undergoes a moral mutation. It becomes something people hoard, worship, and fear losing. And once that transformation occurs, three consequences follow with absolute certainty. First, hoarding replaces circulation. Money stops flowing through society and begins pooling in fewer hands. Second, exploitation replaces exchange. Profit is no longer tied to effort, risk, or real value creation. Third, status replaces service. Wealth becomes proof of superiority rather than responsibility. This is why Al-Ghazali was so critical of earning money from money itself. His objection was not mathematical. It was moral. When money generates more money without labor, risk, or productivity, it breaks the ethical foundation of exchange. One party gains without giving, while the other carries all uncertainty. Inequality becomes baked into the system. And once inequality becomes structural, trust begins to erode. For Al-Ghazali, the true breaking point of a monetary system is not a market crash or a shortage of currency. It is the moment society stops asking whether transactions are just and only asks whether they are profitable. That moment marks the beginning of ethical collapse. He warned that rulers who manipulate currency, debase money, or alter its value for short-term gain commit a form of hidden injustice. The damage may not be visible immediately, but it spreads quietly across society. Prices rise. Wages lag. People feel poorer without understanding why. Faith in fairness dissolves. In modern language, we would call this inflation. But Al-Ghazali understood it as something deeper: broken trust. Once trust in money weakens, fear takes over. People rush to protect themselves. They chase returns. They speculate. They hoard assets. This behavior amplifies instability, creating a vicious cycle where the very actions meant to preserve wealth end up destroying the system's balance. At this stage, collapse does not feel like collapse. It feels like normal life. The consequences, Al-Ghazali warned, extend far beyond markets. Families fracture as wealth becomes the primary measure of success. Knowledge loses value unless it can be monetized. Leadership becomes transactional. Ethics become flexible for the powerful and rigid for the weak. Most dangerously, society begins to confuse price with value. What is expensive is assumed to be important. What is unprofitable is assumed to be useless. This inversion destroys culture, justice, and faith simultaneously. And once money becomes a false god, no civilization escapes unscathed. Al-Ghazali also predicted what happens next. Reforms appear. New rules are written. Scholars argue details. Authorities promise stability. But nothing truly changes because the problem was never technical. You cannot fix a moral collapse with mechanical solutions. As long as money remains disconnected from ethical purpose, fairness, shared risk, real productivity, every reform simply postpones the next crisis. The cycle repeats, each time faster and more destructive than before. Now consider the modern world. Today, money is no longer backed by gold or silver, but by belief. Currency is created through debt. Interest compounds faster than real economic output. Speculation dominates financial markets, while wages stagnate. Trillions appear digitally, while trust quietly disappears socially. Household debt grows. Asset bubbles inflate. Crashes arrive like storms everyone saw forming, but no one stopped. Different systems. Same pattern. Al-Ghazali warned that when money loses its ethical anchor, societies mistake growth for health. They celebrate expansion while ignoring fragility. They confuse complexity with strength. And they are always shocked when collapse arrives, despite the warnings being written centuries earlier. So what does all of this teach us? First, money is a moral instrument before it is an economic one. When ethics fail, no amount of innovation can save the system. Second, systems collapse when money becomes the goal instead of the measure. Speculation without responsibility always ends in instability. Third, trust not technology is the true foundation of currency. Once trust erodes, no policy can restore it quickly. Al-Ghazali believed civilizations do not fall loudly. They decay quietly until collapse feels sudden and unavoidable. The question is no longer whether money will change. It always does. The real question is whether ethics will return before trust disappears completely. If this perspective challenged how you think about money, history, or the future, share this video with someone who still believes financial collapse is only a technical problem. Subscribe for more deep stories where philosophy, history, and modern systems collide. And leave a comment answering one question that still haunts us today. Is our money system broken because of bad design or because we forgot what money was supposed to be?